My fiancée cheated on me with my brother. I walked away. I used to believe that betrayal was loud, something you heard or felt like a sudden crash. But the moment my life collapsed, it was silent. A cold, heavy, suffocating silence that pressed down on my chest like I had forgotten how to breathe. My name is Ryan. I grew up in Denver, Colorado, in what I thought was a normal family. My parents always acted like we were united, and I believed it. Only later did I understand that unity meant I was expected to hold everything together while my younger brother, Ethan, did whatever he wanted. People liked him. They always did. He was charming, easygoing, amusing. I was the responsible one, the steady one. The one who worked harder. The one who planned, helped, supported. Everyone assumed that meant I didn't need anything in return. I met Lena in college. She wasn't loud or dramatic, just warm in a quiet way that made people feel safe. I fell for her gradually, steadily, like a tide rising without you noticing until the shore is gone. Our relationship felt solid, real, something I could build a future on. My family liked her. My parents praised her. Even Ethan joked around with her as if she had always been part of our circle. I proposed to her one evening on an overlook near Boulder. Golden light across the mountains, everything peaceful, everything right. She said yes. We cried. I held her and believed I was stepping into the life I had always wanted. The next 2 weeks felt unreal. Happiness felt simple. We told family and friends. We talked about the future. I thought I was living the beginning of something good. I didn't know I was standing at the edge of something already breaking. One night, Lena said she needed space, said she needed to clear her head. I didn't think too much about it. We were planning a wedding. Stress made sense. She didn't answer messages for hours. Something in me felt wrong. Not jealousy, not paranoia. Just a sinking weight, like my body knew something before my mind had caught up. I checked her location. She was at my parents' house. I drove there. The driveway was dark except for one car. Ethan's car. No lights on in the main rooms. The house was quiet when I went inside. Too quiet. I walked down the hallway and saw faint light from Ethan's room. I don't remember breathing. I don't remember thinking. Just a dead, heavy awareness. They were together. Close. Familiar. Comfortable in a way people don't become overnight. I didn't shout. I didn't speak. I just looked. One moment was enough to understand everything. This wasn't a mistake, and it wasn't new. I left without a word. The numbing shock lasted until morning. Then my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Missed calls. Messages. My mother trying to justify. My father framing the situation as something that needed to be handled quietly. Lena apologizing in the tone of someone seeking forgiveness rather than regret. And Ethan sounding like he believed I should be the one to accept this and move on. My parents came to my apartment. They tried to explain that Ethan was struggling, that he didn't have the stability I had, that Lena had been confused, that the engagement might have been rushed. They spoke about preserving the family. They spoke about loyalty. They spoke as if the only real problem was that I had seen what was happening, not that it was happening at all. That was the moment everything became clear. My family had always chosen Ethan. I didn't lose them that night. I simply realized I had been losing them for years. When they left, the silence returned. Not empty, but sharp. The kind of silence that cuts. I sat alone for hours, not crying, not shouting, just feeling something inside me fall apart. But emotional collapse doesn't last forever. It dries. It hardens. The hurt became clarity. The shock became direction. The emptiness became something cold and deliberate. I understood something simple and final. If I didn't defend myself, they would rewrite the story until I became the problem. They would continue their lives, comfortable, protected, unchallenged. Ethan would keep what he wanted. Lena would stay in the family, and I would become the memory everyone politely avoided. I had been the one who held everything together. Now I was the one who would tear it apart. Not by rage, not by shouting, not even by confrontation, but by truth. If they were going to betray me quietly, I would destroy their lies publicly. Not out of revenge. Out of self-respect. The story everyone thought they controlled was about to change. I wasn't the quiet, forgiving son anymore. I wasn't the one who stepped aside. I wasn't the one who absorbed hurt and stayed silent. Something in me had shifted permanently. I was no longer trying to be loved. I was done protecting people who never protected me. The months after that night were quiet in a way the world never is when it is simply moving on without you. People get up, eat, commute, laugh. Lives continue their small revolutions while grief sits like a foreign passenger you can't shake. I left Denver a few weeks later, not out of drama but necessity. I needed distance, not to run from pain but to stop letting it sit inside the same walls where it had been born. I took a job an hour away, a studio apartment above a laundromat, and for a while the hum of machines and the smell of detergent became my only company. Work was simple and precise, a steady cadence I could sink into so my head would stop replaying faces and rooms. Nights were long. I learned how to be alone without breaking. I learned the mechanics of surviving. Gradually, that survival became strategy. The first step was practical. Document everything. If the family could rewrite what had happened with calm voices and selective memory, then truth needed witnesses and evidence. I saved messages, screenshots, receipts, anything that marked the arc of what I had lost. Not for revenge in the petty sense, but to build an unassailable record in case the past ever tried to be sold back to me as my fault. The act of gathering facts was oddly cleansing. It turned diffuse hurt into focused motion. It became a ledger where sorrow had columns, and I could balance them. The second step was to rebuild identity. For years I had been the responsible brother, the quiet one, the fallback. Those labels had been useful to others but corrosive to me. I enrolled in classes, started running at dawn, took up photography so evenings had something more than rumination in them. I filled my life with small, deliberate choices that belonged only to me. A thrifted leather jacket, a camera strap that never matched anything, playlists that no one else had heard. Each choice was a thread knitting a version of myself that was no longer defined by family roles. Slowly, faces in the past blurred, and new ones, baristas, coworkers, a couple of regulars at the diner, started to anchor me. Even so, a cold core remained. It was not anger in the explosive cinematic sense, it was colder, like a granite vein. When you were wronged so intimately by those who should have loved you, the sensible response isn't always fire. Sometimes it is meticulous patience. I watched their social media from afar at first, then less and less. Their pictures were curated joy, birthdays, holidays, vacations. Each image a varnished proof that life had chosen its side and left me in the margins. But then cracks appeared. Babies get sick, jobs stall, posing cannot hide exhaustion. The more perfect their posts looked, the more glaring their silences became behind them. I became an archivist of the truth, not to gloat, but to keep myself honest. When Ethan's accident happened, 5 years after the betrayal, the world presented me a test. The news arrived as if it belonged on someone else's feed. An accident, a coma, a hospital room. The family fractured and realigned in public terms almost instantly. My name re-entered conversations where it had been carefully kept out. My mother called like a ship sounding the foghorn of obligation. Her voice was different, frayed and urgent, because emergencies have a way of reshuffling loyalties. Later she said she had been trying to reach me for days before she called. Later she said many things designed to soften the fact that she had not been there when it had mattered before. The real test was not whether I would go, it was whether I would bend to their version of what my presence should mean. They wanted me as replacement, as a stopgap to be folded into the life Ethan had created. They wanted me to be the father figure, the provider, the soft place Lena could land on. They wanted me to erase 5 years of silence with a single present tense obligation. The ask was monstrous in its audacity because it presumed my existence was meant for the convenience of others. They asked for everything I had been denied: recognition, gratitude, a seat at the table. But it was offered in a package that included complicity with their earlier betrayal, as if the past could be excused by a present crisis. I thought about walking into that hospital, about the weight of machines and the smell of antiseptic, about seeing Ethan's face still and knowing he had always been the same man who ignored consequences. I thought about Lena, how she had oscillated between apology and entitlement, how she had once come to me with tears that looked, in hindsight, like bargaining chips. I thought about my parents, how they had built a life that favored charisma over care, how they had excused cruelty in the name of protecting the golden child. The calculus was simple: forgive and return to erasure, or keep distance and preserve what I had rebuilt. I stayed away. Not out of malice, not out of callousness, but out of preservation. People called it cruel. Some relatives assumed I would at least show up, to be seen as humane, to keep the family portrait intact. I understood the optics of it. I had once believed in those optics. Now I realized that appearances had been the instruments of my erasure. Going to the hospital would not bring me back into favor for the past, it would merely add another convenient truth for them to exploit. So I grieved at a distance, in my own way, carefully refusing to be consumed again. That refusal cost me a lot. My parents declared me selfish. Old friends were nudged by family narratives to question my character. A smear campaign is rarely a formal thing. It is the steady erosion of other people's impressions until the only story left about you is the one that harms you. I fielded awkward messages, received sideways inquiries, and watched as some of the people who had once sat in my living room began to accept the family's new script. The cruelty of it is subtle. People are kinder to those who fit the story they have been given. But distance also revealed strange, unexpected generosity. Cousins who had always been marginal in my life showed up in ways my parents never had. Old friends who knew how I had been treated picked up where my family left off. They sent messages that didn't seek to frame me but simply to comfort. They shared memories that did not include betrayal and lent me anchors that were not conditional. For the first time I understood that family is not strictly defined by blood. It was a mosaic. Some pieces bright, others dark, but the picture was mine to arrange. Years passed. Ethan recovered, painfully. The coma left scars that were not always visible: headaches, slurred sentences, private shame. He and Lena remained together, bound by choices that once betrayed me and later bound them in ways that were messy and human. They asked for forgiveness publicly in staged ways that made my skin crawl. Careful posts, the kind of language meant to soothe watchers rather than cure wounds. I watched from afar as they rebuilt a life with the same people who had made that impossible for me: friends, neighbors, possessive parents. They asked for my involvement, but it was an involvement predicated on forgetting. I understood the human capacity to shape its own narrative. People want coherence. They will delete complexity to make a story consumable. My decision was to refuse to be the deleted part. I did not want to be a footnote, an asterisk, a forgotten line in someone else's clean biography. I had built a life in which my name mattered to people who had chosen me, not the name they had inherited. There was a day, years later, when something unexpected happened that shifted things, not dramatically, not in a cinematic revenge arc, but in the quieter, more satisfying currency of truth settled. A distant relative, someone who had been there in quieter moments and had not swallowed the family version of events, reached out and asked for the truth, not to judge but to understand. I told the story plainly, without flourish. No accusations, no rhetoric, just the sequence of choices and their consequences. That conversation rippled. Other relatives asked discreetly, a few apologized, some sheepishly admitted they had been told a different story. The effect was not to demolish the family's life but to carve a clean path through the old fog. It mattered less because it changed what had happened than because it forced an accounting that could not be entirely smoothed over. In the end, the most decisive things were the small acts that remade me. The mornings I got up to run, even when my body resisted. The gallery nights where my photos were on the wall and strangers nodded at compositions I had once thought were worthless. The times I said yes to new friendships and yes to a life not dictated by how my parents or brother defined me. Those were not dramatic victories, they were quiet reclamations. They did what angry speeches never could. They created a life that did not rely on someone else's approval. Forgiveness, when it came, was not theatrical. I forgave in pieces. First tolerating the sight of Lena at a relative's wedding years later, then recognizing Ethan in a park with his child and feeling something that was not hatred. I forgave because carrying bitterness was heavy and useless, and because my life, finally, had grown dense enough with its own commitments that other people's demands no longer dictated my steps. Forgiveness did not mean forgetting. It meant acknowledging pain without allowing it to be the landscape of my whole existence. I left Denver permanently some years later, not to flee but because the place had become a museum of what had been. I moved to a city where no one knew our family's story. There I forged a quieter contentment, a job that mattered, friends whose words were reliable, a partner who knew my past but did not make it the axis of our relationship. The ache remained in the corners, a memory with a texture, like a callus from old wounds. Sometimes it flared, most days it did not. When I look back now, the story that I once thought should have ended with a single act of retribution looks small and childish. What mattered was not revenge but wholeness. The line between victim and survivor is narrower than it seems. Survival asks for patience, for the slow accumulation of days lived well. The family that chose Ethan continues with its choices, and they live with consequences of their own making. I made peace with that because I had built a life where my name was not just the echo of someone else's expectations but the beginning of sentences I chose to write. Time reshapes memory in ways we don't notice while we're living through it. The first year away from my family felt sharp, like touching cold metal with bare skin. Every reminder of them held weight. Every conversation about the past felt like reopening a wound before the scab settled. But something strange happened over time. The past stopped being a wound and became a landscape. Still there, but distant, no longer requiring constant attention. I learned to live beside it rather than inside it. The city I moved to was nothing remarkable on the map. A place where no one asked the wrong questions because no one cared who you had been before. I needed that anonymity. I needed days where my last name didn't carry history and no one measured me against someone else. I worked, I ran, I read, I took photographs, I learned how to drink coffee slowly instead of using it to survive another exhausted morning. My life became smaller, but it also became mine. I met someone in that new life. Her name isn't important in the way Lena's used to be. She didn't arrive as an answer to anything. She wasn't a rescue or a cure. She was simply a presence, steady, observant, patient. She never asked for a version of my story I couldn't yet say out loud. She just existed beside me in a way that didn't require performance or apology. For a long time, that was enough. Eventually, it became more. Loving again didn't feel like falling. It felt like growing, slow, intentional, without spectacle. But the past does not exit quietly. One evening, years after I had left, a message appeared. A cousin, one of the few who had never treated my absence as a scandal, wrote that my father had been sick. Not dying, not bedridden, just sick enough for the family to start fearing what they had never acknowledged before. Time was passing, and the future didn't stretch forever like they once assumed. The message was polite, and beneath it, there was something else, an invitation without being phrased as one. I did not respond immediately. I went for a run instead, letting the cold air carve clarity through my lungs. The temptation wasn't to return, but to imagine the possibility of return. To imagine what a conversation would sound like now that years had weathered us all. If I came back, I knew what would happen. There would be apologies shaped to be palatable rather than honest. There would be acknowledgments phrased as misunderstandings. The story would try to rewrite itself again. But I had outgrown their versions of the story. Still, I didn't want to live a life defined only by distance. Healing had taught me that not every boundary needs to be a wall. Some can simply be a line no one crosses without invitation. So I returned, quietly, without announcement, not as the son they remembered, but as the man they no longer recognized. The house looked smaller, not physically, but in presence. Time shrinks the things we used to fear when we finally step outside of them. I saw my mother first. Age had softened something in her. Not regret, just fatigue. Years of refusing to confront truth had their own gravity. She did not speak like before. She did not instruct or justify. She simply looked at me as someone who had become unreachable. My father was thinner, slower, not dying but undeniably changed. He looked at me like someone remembering a language they once spoke fluently but could no longer pronounce without effort. And Ethan was there. He wasn't the golden child anymore. Not in posture, not in presence. Life had marked him in its own way. Not punishment, just consequence. The tiredness in his face wasn't physical. It was the exhaustion of someone who had lived long enough to understand the cost of his own choices. We did not rehash the past. We did not dissect the betrayal. We did not reopen old wounds. Some things do not need to be spoken because they have already been lived. Being in that house again did not hurt. It did not heal. It simply was a room in a life I had already walked through. I stayed 1 hour, no more. When I left, no one asked me to return. Not out of resentment, out of recognition. They understood now, too late, that love cannot be expected, that loyalty cannot be demanded, that a son is not an inheritance to be kept in storage until needed. Driving away felt final, but not dramatic. There was no music rising, no triumphant closure. Just a quiet exhale, the kind that comes after carrying something heavy for too long and finally putting it down. Healing is not a moment. It is a choice, repeated over and over, until it becomes a truth you no longer have to force. I did not forgive them to let them back in. I forgave them so they no longer lived in me.